The first snowfall of the season came early that year, falling soft and soundless over the endless woods of northern Ontario. By the time Elise pulled her car off the gravel road, the sky was already a dim bruise of purple and blue, and the forest around her looked almost like a painting. Every branch glazed in ice, every shadow stretching long and uncertain. The old cabin sat at the end of a narrow trail, its roof sagging under the weight of years and silence. Her grandmother's place, empty since the funeral. Elise killed the engine, and for a long moment she didn't move. The air outside was still, heavy in that way it gets when snow muffles everything. She could hear her own heartbeat and the faint ticking of the cooling engine. She hadn't been here in more than 15 years. When she left as a teenager, she swore she never would return. But then her mother's message had come, short, apologetic, filled with a kind of worry she couldn't quite explain. "There's something in that house, Elise. It started after the funeral. It knows your name." At first, Elise thought it was grief talking. Her mother had always been prone to melancholy, especially after long winters. But then she received the second message, not a call, but a recording, distorted, whispered, barely a voice at all. It came through her phone while she slept. When she played it in the morning, she heard her name again, spoken low and deliberate. "Come back before dark." So here she was, sitting in the car, the forest swallowing what little light remained. When she finally stepped outside, her boots sank into the snow with a soft crunch. The air smelled like pine sap and frost. She grabbed her suitcase, locked the car out of habit, and started toward the cabin. The key, cold and tarnished, fit perfectly into the lock, though she had half expected it wouldn't. The door opened with a sigh. Inside, the air was stale, the kind of stillness that felt less like emptiness and more like waiting. The furniture was covered in sheets, a fine layer of dust softening the edges of everything. Her grandmother's old rocking chair faced the window, as if it had been left mid-conversation with the snow. Elise set her bag down and stood listening. Somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. Just wood settling, she told herself, just age. But her body tensed all the same. She made a small fire in the stove, watching the flame catch and build, its light painting gold onto the cabin walls. She'd planned to stay only one night, maybe two, just long enough to see what her mother had meant. Maybe she'd find nothing, just silence, memory, dust. Maybe that was all the haunting there ever was. When darkness came, it came suddenly. One moment there was twilight through the windows. The next, there was only the reflection of her own face in the glass. She made tea, found an old blanket, and sat near the fire. The quiet grew thicker. She almost didn't hear it at first. The faint knock, distant and soft, like someone tapping on wood far away. She looked toward the door, but the sound wasn't from there. It came from the back of the cabin, a slow, deliberate rhythm. She stood, listening harder. The sound stopped. Then another, this time from the opposite wall, lower, like knuckles dragging along the siding. Her heartbeat quickened. She told herself it could be branches, wind, an animal. The forest was full of movement this time of year. Still, she felt that pressure, the instinctive sense of being watched. She forced herself to check the windows. Nothing outside but the reflection of the firelight, her own pale face staring back. When she looked longer, though, she thought she saw something behind her reflection. A faint smudge, darker than the rest of the glass, like someone standing just out of frame. She turned quickly. No one there. Elise exhaled sharply and laughed under her breath.
"You're just tired," she whispered. "It's the drive, the cold. You're scaring yourself." But as the fire settled lower, the cabin seemed to expand around her. Shadows deepened, corners grew thicker, and the silence began to pulse like a heartbeat. She decided to go to bed early. Upstairs, her grandmother's room remained untouched, bed neatly made, a rosary hanging from the lamp, the faint smell of cedar still clinging to the quilt. Elise hesitated before turning off the light. There was comfort in brightness, even dim and flickering. When she lay down, she left the lamp on. Sometime past midnight, the cold woke her. The fire downstairs had died, and the temperature had dropped sharply. She pulled the blanket tighter and turned onto her side and froze. Someone was standing in the doorway. At first, she thought she was dreaming. The shape was vague, just a darker patch against the dim yellow light. A person's outline, still, watching. Her throat tightened. "Mom?" she whispered. No answer. She reached for her phone on the bedside table, fumbling for the flashlight. The beam cut through the shadows and revealed an empty doorway. No one there. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She stood, checked the hall, the stairs, the kitchen below. Empty. Only the wind outside, moving through the trees. When she came back upstairs, the door to her grandmother's room was half closed, though she was sure she had left it open. She shut it fully this time, clicked the lock, and leaned her forehead against the cool wood. Her reflection in the nearby mirror wavered in the dim light, her own eyes wide, uncertain. That was when she heard it again. A voice, faint, like breath through cloth. "You shouldn't have come back." Her stomach twisted. She spun around, scanning the room. The mirror's surface seemed to tremble like ripples in water. Behind her reflection, for just a moment, another face seemed to hover, older, paler, smiling faintly. Then it was gone. Elise stumbled backward, knocking the lamp over. The bulb shattered, plunging the room into darkness. She gasped, hands shaking, feeling her way toward the wall until she found her phone again. When the light flared, the mirror showed only her reflection. But something had changed. There were handprints, faint, fogged impressions on the inside of the glass.
Elise didn't sleep after that. She sat on the edge of the bed, the phone light flickering in her trembling hand, listening for every creak and whisper the house made. The minutes stretched until they felt unreal. Outside, the wind had picked up, brushing against the cabin's walls with a soft, persistent moan. She couldn't bring herself to look at the mirror again. At dawn, when the gray light finally returned, she forced herself downstairs. The fire had burned out completely. The room smelled faintly of smoke and cold ash. For a moment, everything looked normal, until she saw the footprints. They were faint, but visible in the thin layer of snow that had blown in through the cracks near the back door. Bare footprints, small, childlike. They led from the back entrance to the middle of the living room and stopped right in front of the chair by the window. Her breath caught. She followed the trail with her eyes, every muscle in her body tense. There were no prints leading away. Elise knelt near the chair, staring at the last mark in the snow. Her grandmother had always sat there, watching the woods. Sometimes Elise used to sit on the rug beside her as a child, drawing, listening to stories about spirits that lingered between worlds. "The forest remembers," her grandmother would whisper, voice low and reverent. "And if you listen too long, it starts to whisper back."
Elise rubbed her temples. She told herself she needed air, sunlight, something living. She pulled on her coat and stepped outside. The woods were quiet, heavy with snow. The trees stood close together, their trunks dark and narrow, like silent witnesses. She walked down the old path toward the frozen creek, her breath forming ghosts in the air. That's when she heard it, a soft hum, almost like a lullaby, familiar. A voice she couldn't place at first, but it made her skin prickle. It was the tune her grandmother used to hum while cooking, the one Elise hadn't heard since childhood. It came from deeper in the woods. "Hello?" she called, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is someone there?" The sound stopped. Then came a whisper, faint, carried by the wind. "Don't let the dark think for you." Elise froze. The words were so strange, so out of place, that for a moment she thought she'd imagined them. But the voice had been clear and close. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the white stillness. Nothing but trees, nothing but silence. She ran back to the cabin. Inside, she locked the door, breathing hard. Her reflection in the window looked foreign. Pale skin, wild hair, wide eyes. She sat down on the floor, back against the wall, trying to steady herself. Her phone vibrated suddenly. A new voice message. The number wasn't familiar. No area code, no name. Just static at first, then the faint sound of breathing. Then that same low voice. "You brought it back with you." Elise dropped the phone. It hit the wooden floor with a sharp crack, the screen flashing before going dark. She wanted to leave, to drive back to the nearest town, but something in her hesitated. The road was long, buried under snow, and the storm outside was growing heavier. Even if she left now, she might not make it far. She made another fire, brighter this time, and sat close to it. The warmth helped, but only a little. Every now and then, she thought she heard movement upstairs, a slow, dragging step. The old boards sighed and shifted, as if remembering the weight of someone who used to walk there.
Elise tried to distract herself. She unpacked her bag, took out her grandmother's old photo album, the one she'd found on the top shelf the night before. She flipped through its pages slowly. The photos were faded, yellowed by time. Her grandmother as a young woman, her mother as a child, and Elise, maybe 5 years old, sitting by the creek with a red ribbon in her hair. But there was another picture she didn't recognize. It was tucked behind the last page, half torn. It showed the same cabin, but the windows were dark, and in one of them, a shadowy figure stood watching from inside. The shape was too blurred to tell who it was, but something about the outline made her stomach twist. She turned the photo over. There were words written in her grandmother's shaky handwriting. "It waits for thought." The sentence made no sense, yet somehow it fit. That night, she left the fire burning higher than before and curled up on the couch. Sleep came in fragments, shallow, restless. She dreamed of the forest. In the dream, she was walking through the trees again, but the snow was gone. The ground was black mud, slick and warm, like it had soaked up something other than rain. And she wasn't alone. She could feel something moving beside her, not footsteps, but thought, as though another consciousness brushed against her own, testing, curious. A faint whisper echoed in her head. "You think too loudly." Elise woke gasping, drenched in sweat. The fire had gone out again. Her phone lay beside her on the floor, the screen glowing faintly. She picked it up.
There was a new message. This one wasn't audio, it was a photo. Her breath hitched when she opened it. The image was of her sleeping, on the couch, blanket pulled to her chin, fire burning low beside her. The photo had been taken from above, like someone standing right over her. She scrambled to her feet, heart racing, scanning the room. "Who's there?" she shouted, voice breaking. Silence, only the echo of her own breath. She ran to the window and yanked the curtain aside. Nothing but snow and trees. When she turned back, the door to the kitchen was open, though she was sure she'd closed it before sleeping. She approached slowly, each step cautious, the floor creaking beneath her. The kitchen was empty, but written across the frost on the window, as though traced by a finger, were 4 words. "Don't think after dark." The letters began to fade as she watched, melting back into the glass until they were gone. Elise stumbled backward, her knees weak. She didn't understand what any of it meant, but one thing was certain. Whatever was in that cabin, it was aware of her. It had been waiting, watching, listening, and now it knew how she thought. The next morning, Evelyn woke with the peculiar certainty that someone had whispered her name as she drifted between dreams and waking. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that wasn't peace, but pressure, as if every board and beam were holding its breath. She went about her routine, coffee, notes, transcribing, but her thoughts wandered constantly to the locked door beneath the stairs. By late afternoon, she could no longer resist. She fetched the key from the old tin in the drawer, its teeth rusted and cold, and crouched before the narrow door. The smell of earth and mildew rose as she turned the lock, a mechanical sigh escaping from somewhere deep inside. The door opened reluctantly. A flight of wooden steps led down into a basement she hadn't realized was so large.
She descended slowly, each step groaning beneath her weight. The air grew cooler, the smell stronger. Light from her phone caught shapes: an old rocking chair, shelves stacked with jars, a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. Something brushed her shoulder. She turned sharply. Nothing. In the corner was a child's desk, the kind that might once have sat in a schoolhouse. A page lay on it, yellowed and brittle. She lifted it gently. The handwriting was shaky, but deliberate. "If you forget what you saw, it follows. If you remember, it waits." Evelyn frowned. The words bled slightly, as though written in something other than ink. She glanced toward the mirror and for an instant thought she saw movement behind her, a reflection of herself, only her reflection didn't move when she did. She stumbled back, her phone's light flickering. A faint giggle, not cruel, just wrong, drifted from the dark. She fled up the stairs, slamming the door shut, locking it, pressing her forehead against the cool wood. Her breath came in sharp bursts. For the rest of the day she refused to go near that door again. But that night, as the wind scraped at the windows, she began to hear things. The creak of the rocking chair below, the soft drag of feet across concrete, a whisper that sounded too close to her ear. Evelyn. She sat up in bed, heart pounding. The whisper stopped. Silence, heavy and full. She waited, every nerve taut. Then, softly, she heard humming, a slow, tuneless lullaby echoing from the walls. She covered her ears, trembling, but it didn't block the sound. It was inside her head. At dawn, she called the only person in Black Hollow she'd spoken to,
the elderly librarian, Mrs. Porter. Her voice on the other end was weary but kind. "You found the old Thomas place, didn't you?" the woman said quietly. "That house been empty a long while. Should have stayed that way." Evelyn hesitated. "Do you know who lived here before?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "A teacher, Miss Harrow, lost her mind after the fire at the schoolhouse. Said she heard her students calling to her in the dark. They found her in that basement you've got there, sitting in front of a mirror, whispering to it." Evelyn's hand tightened around the phone. What was she saying? "No one knows," Mrs. Porter said. "But they say if you stay there long enough, the mirror starts whispering back." The line went dead. Evelyn sat in the silence, her skin crawling. She thought of the page she'd found. If you forget what you saw, it follows. If you remember, it waits. She wanted to leave. She almost did. But her curiosity, that insatiable hunger that had driven her to study death and memory, anchored her there. That night, she placed the mirror she'd found on the table beside her bed. It was cracked, clouded, its edges flecked with corrosion. She stared into it, her reflection fragmented into shards. She said, "If it whispers, then I'll listen." At 2:37 a.m., she woke again to the sound of humming. The same tune, but this time closer. She turned toward the mirror. In its surface, she saw her room, but something was off. The shadows were deeper, thicker, as if pooling in corners where none existed. Then her reflection blinked a moment after she did. Evelyn froze. The reflection's mouth opened slightly. She leaned forward, straining to see, her breath fogging the glass. "Do you want to remember?" it whispered. Evelyn jerked back. The sound hadn't come from her mind. It had come from the mirror. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice trembled. The reflection tilted its head, that same slow, unnatural movement she had seen once before, in the window on her first night. "You already know," it said. And then for an instant she saw them. Shapes crowding behind her reflection, faces pressed against the glass from the other side. Children, gray-skinned and silent, their eyes hollowed with smoke. The fire, Miss Harrow's students. Evelyn gasped and stumbled back, knocking the mirror off the table. It shattered against the floor. But in each broken piece, her reflection still stared up at her, multiplied, infinite, whispering the same words again and again. "You already know. You already know." She fled from the room, slamming the door behind her. The whispers continued even then, seeping through the cracks like smoke. The next day, she drove into town. The fog was thicker than ever, curling like breath around the trees. She stopped at the small cafe beside the library, desperate for the noise of other people. But when she entered, conversation faltered. The few locals inside turned to look at her, eyes wary. "You all right, miss?" the waitress asked finally. Evelyn hesitated. "Has anyone ever said the house is haunted?" The waitress frowned. "Not haunted, no. Cursed, maybe. People who stay there start seeing things, mirrors mostly. They say the dead can't rest because someone keeps remembering them." Evelyn shivered. "What happens to them, the people who stay?" "They don't leave," the waitress said simply. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. Every window seemed to have a face pressed against it. The radio turned on by itself at 3 a.m., static whispering a pattern she couldn't quite decipher. Her notebook pages turned on their own, as if unseen fingers were searching for something. When the clock struck 4, the whisper returned, softer, closer. "Do you want to remember?" Her throat went dry. She answered without meaning to. "Yes." The light flickered, and the room grew impossibly cold. In the dark glass of the window, her reflection smiled. The air inside the cabin felt heavier than ever. Each breath Elise took seemed to press against her lungs, thick with cold and damp. She hadn't moved from the living room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, the shattered mirror fragments scattered around her like a constellation of broken stars. The whispers continued, soft, relentless, brushing her mind like fingertips against her skull. Then the familiar lullaby started again, that faint, tuneless hum that belonged neither to her grandmother nor to memory alone. It began far away, echoing from the corners of the cabin, then slowly creeping closer, as if tracing her every heartbeat. She could hear the boards creak beneath invisible feet, the drag of a shadow over the floor, the brush of cold breath against her neck. Elise pressed her hands over her ears, but the sound persisted, inside her head, vibrating in her bones. The shards of the mirror on the floor reflected faint images, a child's face here, a woman's figure there, all staring back with hollow eyes, and among them her own face, smiling faintly, but not her own smile. Her vision blurred, the room spinning until the whispers coalesced into words, clear and deliberate. "You thought. You remembered. We are here." Panic surged, raw and electric. She scrambled toward the door, but the cabin seemed larger than before, its walls stretching impossibly. The doorway she had opened countless times now led only to darkness, thick and impenetrable, as though the cabin itself had folded inward around her. She tripped and fell to her hands and knees, pressing her forehead to the wooden floor, listening. The humming stopped. Silence, heavy and expectant, filled the room. Then came a voice, singular, sharp, and intimate. "Do you want to leave?" Her breath caught. "Yes, please," she cried. The voice was still calm, patient. "Then remember carefully." Elise's mind spun. She wanted to obey whatever force had ensnared her. But remembering was no comfort. It was a key, a lever. The very act of recalling brought the shapes closer, sharpened the shadows. She tried to focus on memories of warmth, of sunlight, of days when the snow had not yet touched the forest, but the whispers reminded her of the truths she had buried, the fragments of her grandmother's warnings, the voices in the photograph, the child's desk in the basement, the message on the window. "You cannot forget. You must remember," the voice said. Elise screamed and pressed her hands to her ears again, but the shadows in the room moved independently of her, stretching along the floor and walls, creeping toward her. A hand, pale and translucent, brushed her ankle. She kicked it away, trembling, but it returned, and then another, all reaching, grasping, insistent. The room tilted. Elise fell backward, colliding with the table, the fragments of the mirror scattering further. In each shard she glimpsed herself, countless versions, each one whispering secrets she hadn't thought she remembered. Some smiled, some frowned, some seemed to weep silently.
A sudden heat of fear coursed through her, and the reflection that mirrored her own face smiled the widest. Lips moved without sound, forming words her mind somehow understood. "The last thought before dark." Her stomach knotted. She realized it now, the meaning, the inevitability. Every thought she had had as the sun fell, every shadow she had imagined, every whisper she had resisted had been a beacon, and she had illuminated it for it to find her.
The other selves in the fragments of glass leaned closer, pressing toward her, merging into one fluid, impossible shape. A low murmur rose from them, voices folding over themselves, echoing the forest outside, the hum of snow and wind and memory. Elise tried to scream, but no sound came. Her legs refused to move. She clawed at the floor, the walls, the empty air around her. And then she saw it, the figure she had glimpsed on the first night, pale, standing at the edge of the window, its gaze fixed, unblinking. It stepped forward, and the room seemed to shiver with its motion. You are thinking. You cannot stop. Everything constricted, the ceiling lowered, the floor pulled tight. The fragments of mirror lifted, spinning around her in a cyclone of reflected selves, each whispering, murmuring, demanding. The lullaby became deafening, the chorus of remembered thoughts growing into a roar. Her body felt weightless, her senses collapsing inward. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pressure eased. The shadows paused. The whispers quieted to a single, intimate voice in her ear. Look.
Elise's gaze, wild and unfocused, turned toward the largest shard of mirror. In its surface, she saw her room as it had always been: the bed, the walls, the fire she had let die, the snow outside. And in that reflection, not a version of herself, but the cabin itself, infinite, folding, timeless. And within it, a face she knew by heart, her own, but not hers. The eyes were pale, deep, hollow, and calm. The smile, soft, slight, impossibly patient, curved in a way she had never smiled herself. Her breath froze. The voice whispered again, "You remembered. Now you are here. Now we wait." A sudden gust of cold, heavier than winter, swept the cabin. The mirror shard swirled in a slow spiral around her, pulling her closer, closer to the central reflection. Her limbs were numb, her mind quivered between terror and comprehension. The reflections began to merge. Her face in the glass became her own, then other, then impossible. She could feel their presence inside her, brushing against her thoughts, sifting memories she had never spoken aloud. Every fear, every secret, every half-formed doubt, they consumed it all. Elise realized, with a clarity that chilled her to the marrow, that she would never leave this room. Not in body, not in mind. The cabin was no longer a place, it was an organism, and she had fed it with her remembering. It had waited, yes, but she had invited it in. Her own reflection leaned forward, closer than physics should allow, eyes boring into her soul. You cannot leave until someone recalls your last thought before dark, it said. Elise tried to run, tried to scream, tried to forget. Nothing worked. The shadows pressed closer, her mind splintered across infinite reflections, and she felt herself dissolve into the glass. And in that moment, she understood the truth. There was no escape, only memory, only thought, only the perpetual cycle of the dark and the witness. The wind outside howled through the trees, snow beginning again, erasing footprints, erasing time. The cabin waited, patient and eternal, a monument to all those who thought and remembered and never left. And when the lights went out, the last thing she saw reflected in the window was not her face, but another, smiling faintly behind the glass.